Pope Francis starts a funeral mass as the coffin of late Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI is placed at St. Peter's Square at the Vatican on Thursday. Vatican City, AP, bells tolled Thursday for the funeral of Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI, the German theologian who made history by retiring, as thousands of mourners packed St. Peter's Square for a rare requiem mass of a dead pontiff presided over by a living one. The faithful applauded as pallbearers carried Benedict's cypress coffin out of the fog-shrouded street. Peter's Basilica and rested it before the altar. With red-robed clergy looking on, Benedict's longtime secretary, Archbishop Georg Gainswein, bent down and kissed a book of the Gospels that was left open on the coffin. Heads of state and royalty, clergy from around the world and thousands of regular people flocked to the Vatican, despite Benedict's requests for simplicity and official efforts to keep the first funeral for an Pope Emeritus in modern times low-key. Many hailed from Benedict's native Bavaria and donned traditional dress, including boiled wool coats to guard against the morning chill. Some text goes here: "We came to pay homage to Benedict and wanted to be here today to say goodbye," said Raymond Maynor, who traveled from a small village east of Munich for the funeral. "He was a very good pope." The former Joseph Ratzinger, who died December 31 at age 95, is considered one of the 20th century's greatest theologians and spent his lifetime upholding church doctrine. But he will go down in history for a singular, revolutionary act that changed the future of the papacy. He retired, the first pope in 6 centuries to do so. Pope Francis has praised Benedict's courage to step aside, saying it opened the door to other popes doing the same. Francis, for his part, recently said he has already left written instructions outlining the conditions in which he too would resign. Francis was presiding over the funeral, which authorities estimated some 100,000 would attend, higher than an original estimate of 60,000, Italian media reported, citing police security plans. Peter's Square at the Vatican ahead of the funeral mass for late Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI on Thursday. Only Italy and Germany were invited to send official delegations, but other heads of state and government took the Vatican up on its offer and come in their private capacity. They included several other heads of state, at least 4 prime ministers and 2 delegations of royal representatives. Matteo Colonna, a 20-year-old seminarian from Teramo, Italy, said he attended in part because of the historic nature of the funeral, but it also had personal resonance for him. Some text goes here: "The first spark of my vocation started under the pontificate of Benedict, but then it became even stronger under Pope Francis," Colonna said, while sitting in prayer in St. "I see a continuity between these 2 popes and the fact that today Francis is celebrating the funeral and Benedict's memory is an historical event." Early Thursday the Vatican released the official history of Benedict's life, a short document in Latin that was placed in a metal cylinder in his coffin before it was sealed, along with the coins and medallions minted during his papacy and his pallium stoles. The document gave ample attention to Benedict's historic resignation and referred to him as Pope Emeritus, citing verbatim the Latin words he uttered on February 11, 2013, when he announced he would retire. The document, known as a rogito or deed, also cited his theological and papal legacy, including his outreach to Anglicans and Jews and his efforts to combat clergy sexual abuse, continually calling the Church to conversion, prayer, penance and purification. The funeral ritual itself is modeled on the code used for dead popes, but with some modifications given Benedict was not a reigning pontiff when he died. After the Mass, Benedict's cypress coffin was to be placed inside a zinc one, then an outer oak casket before being entombed in the crypt in the grottos underneath St. While the ritual is novel, it does have some precedent. In 1802, Pope Pius VII presided over the funeral in St. Peter's of his predecessor, Pius VI, who had died in exile in France in 1799 as a prisoner of Napoleon. Peter's Square at the Vatican ahead of the funeral mass for late Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI on Thursday. Some 200,000 paid tribute to Benedict during 3 days of public viewing in the Basilica, with one of the last, Friar Rosario Vitali, spending an hour praying by his body. He said Benedict had given him a special dispensation to begin the process of becoming a priest, which was required because of a physical disability. "So today I came here to pray on his tomb, on his body, and to say thank you for my future priesthood, for my ministry," he said. Benedict never intended his retirement to last as long as it did. At nearly 10 years it was longer than his 8-year pontificate. And the unprecedented situation of a retired pope living alongside a reigning one prompted calls for protocols to guide future popes emeritus to prevent any confusion about who is really in charge. John Paul II's quarter-century as pope, Ratzinger spearheaded a crackdown on dissent as prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, taking action against the left-leaning liberation theology that spread in Latin America in the 1970s and against dissenting theologians and nuns who didn't toe the Vatican's hard line on matters like sexual morals. His legacy was marred by the clergy sexual abuse scandal, even though he recognized earlier than most the filth of priests who raped children, and actually laid the groundwork for the Holy See to punish them. As Cardinal and Pope, he passed sweeping church legislation that resulted in 848 priests being defunct from 2004 to 2014, roughly his pontificate with a year on either end. But abuse survivors still held him responsible for the crisis, for failing to sanction any bishop who moved abusers around and identifying him as embodying the clerical system that long protected the institution over victims. A group representing German clergy abuse survivors called on German officials attending Benedict's funeral to demand more action from the Vatican on sexual abuse. Eckiger Tisch asked German leaders to demand that Francis issue a universal church law stipulating zero tolerance in dealing with abuse by clergy.